Okay, great to have everybody on today. Today is June 30th. It's the, our what I call the monthly 30th Q&A session, which is all about anything related to the afterlife. So it's an open forum. Open forum means that you can ask anything about anything related to the afterlife. So there's no special agenda or anything other than we're going to talk about the afterlife. And you can ask me anything. Obviously, for those of you who don't know me, what I'm talking about is through my own experiences with the afterlife personally. And so obviously it's going through my filter, my consciousness, my mind, my filter, and how I've interpreted these different experiences that I've been having for the last 45 years or so. I got 3 books out, and I got 2 of them right here. There's another one over there, whatever. But we got Overcoming the Fear of Death, and I got this book. This is Marcus Aurelius Updated. It's a collection of 67 essays that I've done on various subjects about how to live life with less suffering and more contentment. And this is my new book, After the Afterlife. So this is kind of a little bit more, well, all of my books kind of relate to afterlife to some degree, but this one is really focused on my experiences with the afterlife, in particular, my memories of my past lives. There's an ebook of this out also, and I'm doing an audio book. I was just talking to my buddy Steve in LA, where I live, and I'm going to work with him in his sound studio. So it may not, I was hoping maybe it'd be out in July or something. It might be August, it might be September, depending on what he's going on with his sound studio and me getting time in there and so forth. So we'll see. You'll find out. But I am going to be doing an audiobook, absolutely. It's just a matter of timing on that 3rd book, After the Afterlife, the audiobook of it. These, as I mentioned, these sessions monthly are all recorded, and I'm going to send all of you there's like 82 of you who've registered for these sessions. So you get a link to the direct link to the recording of each of the sessions I do each month. However, if you lose the email or you don't find the link or whatever, you can't find the link in your email queue or whatever, you can always go to my YouTube channel. It's a open to the public YouTube channel. And hold on a second. Okay, can you text her and tell her, let's see, text her and get Tamara O'Brien, who, text her, and I will give you give me my phone back. I'll give you Tamara's cell phone to text her, and get the 2 of them together, and she'll help her get in. Okay. So what I was saying is that you can always go to my public YouTube channel, and you can find these videos there under the playlist that's called 30th monthly Q&A session, something like that. So there's a special playlist that just has these sessions on there, so you can go back and you listen to the ones from November and December and January and so forth, so on. Okay. There's also a playlist. I think I have 7 playlists in my YouTube channel. By the way, my YouTube channel is just called Kelvin Chin Turning Within. That's the name of the YouTube channel. You could probably just find it by putting my name in the search window also. But there's also a playlist called Interviews. And so that's also a good one that you can go to any of the playlists and look at any of the videos. But that one has current interviews that I'm doing. And I think I've done a dozen interviews recently. In the last month, I think I've done a dozen different interviews, and I have about another 12 or 15 or something, or 20 coming up over the next couple of few months. So that's a good one just to kind of keep an eye out for, the interview playlist. One last thing before I open it up to the floor to you guys to ask me questions is we're recording on Zoom, obviously. When you ask me a question, if you're not too shy, then please turn on your video, because on the recording, then people will see who's asking the question. Otherwise, it comes up as a blank screen. And even if you have your picture up, sometimes it'll show your picture. Sometimes it's just a black blank screen. And I don't know why Zoom does it one way or the other way, depending on the recording, but it does. But if your video camera is on, it'll show, you know, the speaker speaking, because I'm gonna record, send you guys the recording in speaker view as opposed to what you're seeing now which is gallery. That way people can eat and not watch people eating and that kind of thing in the recording that I send out to you guys. Okay. So again, if you feel comfortable, if you're really shy, don't worry about it. I want you to ask the question. So don't you let that prevent you from asking a question. But if you feel okay about it, remember to turn your video on when you're asking a question. That way people who are watching the recording will see somebody asking a question as opposed to just some mysterious voice from the side panel or something on Zoom. Okay, so let's open it up. Open the floor up. Who wants to ask a question first? Yeah. Amber has which one? I don't know. Actually, send it to her in her in her email address. So it's coming to you in your email instead, Tamara, because for some reason I have two mobile phones for you and I can't remember which one you want. But anyway,
I've got both, so no problem.
It's coming to you in email. Yeah.
Okay.
So just connect the two of them and so that she can talk to that person. Okay, who wants to ask a question? Question. Any questions? Questions.
Kelvin, I always love when you talk about, like, when you was Saint Peter, when you were a disciple of Jesus.
Yeah.
And the fact that you remember that, I mean, that was like my first time coming here, and I was like, "You're a what?"
I know, I'm a what?
You're a what? And you were where? And I thought, well, that's just so fascinating to hear, and I would love to hear a little more. And I don't know if anyone else knows.
Yeah, so I'll say a few words about that, and then you can ask me follow-up questions if I don't talk about what you want me to talk about. But yeah, I remember being with Jesus and walking with Jesus and eating and laughing and crying and sometimes arguing and so forth, because I was a little bit obstinate sometimes, and sometimes I would have to ask him a question 6 times because I was really trying to understand things. That's one thing I talk about in my new book about one of the personality traits that I've had for many, many thousands of years is kind of being stubborn. So that means what? Stubborn in terms of trying to understand things. So if I really don't understand something, and this goes to any of you, if I'm having a conversation with you, don't get pissed off at me if I keep asking you the same question. Like, what do you mean by that? Because I'm not doing it to be a jerk. I'm doing it because I really didn't understand something. And so I would do that with him, and so it's come out, like Peter the Rock and all this. And I think that's mostly kind of a personality thing that I would ask questions a lot, because I really wanted to understand what he was talking about. And there was a lot of things. I mean, some of it comes out in the parables in the Bible and so forth, but parables are very difficult for, I think, most 21st century people to understand, 20th, 21st century people. It's not the way we generally talk, and we generally don't teach in parables. But my analogous, there you go, the word. My analogous way of teaching is to use analogies. And so those of you who've taken my classes before, I use a lot of analogies. And to me, it's always much more easy for my little mind to understand anyway, in my teaching. But his thing was parables. And in those parables, if you pay attention and really dissect what he was talking about in some of the parables that have been captured, and I think a lot of the parables are very accurate. Not everything in the Bible is accurate. We know that. I mean, religious historians have told us for many, many, many decades who have researched this, that you can't take everything out of the Bible literally. But some of the stuff is accurate. So I don't want to throw it all out, out the window. Some of it is accurate. And the parables, there's a lot of accurate stuff in the parables. And I think if you look at the parables, you'll see how intellectually vibrant Jesus's mind was. And I think that gets lost, unfortunately, in the general characterization of Jesus as being a very loving person, which he was and still is. And some of you, I won't call out any names here, but some of you communicate still with him now. And so many of you can. And so he still exists. He's on the other side. He's not in physical, biological form. So if anybody you see on YouTube claims that they're Jesus, it's like, oh, okay, good on you. Good luck with that. But he's on the other side. And he's a very loving being, incredibly loving being. And so that characterization of him is accurate. It's accurate. It's not inaccurate. It's very accurate, but it's incomplete. That's my thing. It's an incomplete characterization of him. But it's the characterization that kind of, well, think about it. What's more emotionally appealing to people? Talking about characterizing somebody as very loving and acceptant and embracing of humanity, or somebody who's got a really sharp intellect who can dissect ideas and thoughts and so forth. It's much sexier and much more emotionally attractive to talk about love and to people. But I think it doesn't do Jesus justice. And so for those of us who remember being with him, that's also an aspect that we remember having been with him that is largely missed, I think, by the masses in terms of the way he's thought of. The seeking the kingdom of heaven within is something that I was talking to my buddy Cayman here, who's actually live in the room with me here. I'm in Cayman's house. I was house sitting for him in South Carolina. So those are his books in behind me. But Cayman is a very well-read young man. But we were talking about seeking the kingdom of heaven within, that concept of going within, turning within, and connecting with oneself, which is my language, my 21st century language, which, because I don't want to sound religious, because it's not what I do is not religious. It's spiritual, but it's not religious. But that's what I call turning within meditation, turning within. But he called it seeking the kingdom of heaven within, because remember, Jesus did not consider himself a religious icon. He was a spiritual teacher, and he still is a spiritual teacher, and he has been a spiritual teacher since he was Jesus and before he was Jesus. So he never thought of creating a religion. That wasn't part of the deal. It was part of the deal was go out and teach and help people, help relieve suffering and so forth and so on. So, he's always thought of himself. I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but he's told us this recently in the last several years, that we can talk about him, that he prefers to be thought of as a teacher, not a god, not anything divine, but a teacher is how he wants to be remembered. And so there's that. And then the whole, I'll say one other thing, I'll open up to other questions. And if you have a follow-up question, Tamara, feel free, which is the notion that he died on the cross to save everybody from their sins is something that was made up by Paul, okay? By Paul. And I talk about this memory that I have in my book, my new book. I talk about this memory where I remember when we called Paul, or James actually, who was Jesus's brother, James, who was head of the Jerusalem church, head of the group of us, basically, from that standpoint. He stayed in Jerusalem, James did, until it got too violent. And those of you may know the history of that. But anyway, he was in Jerusalem, and he called us all to a meeting back in Jerusalem. And that's when we called Paul to the mat and said, hey, we shared Jesus's teaching with you. You'd never been with Jesus, etc. Those of you don't know that, Paul was never physically in the presence of Jesus. He was He came on the scene about 3.5 years after Jesus died, after Jesus was murdered. And so we called Paul to the mat and said, hey, don't stop this teaching and telling people that this thing you made up, that Jesus died on the cross to save everybody from their sins. And he promised, and I still remember, I was very angry with him about it, because it's not what Jesus was. It wasn't part of he just made that all up. And he promised us that he would go back to teaching what we were teaching, overcoming the fear of death, turning within, or seeking the kingdom of heaven within, and so forth and so on. The various teachings of Jesus, and being kind and so forth, and being wise like a serpent and gentle as a dove, and these various teachings, that these phrases that kind of capture larger bodies of teaching about love and acceptance of others and so forth, that you've heard me talk about. And he said, yeah, I'll go back to doing that. I'm sorry, whatever. And he went out and he lied to us, and he kept talking about this crucifixion being an amazing event that saved everybody from their sins. So he made all that up. So that still upsets many of us, as you can maybe tell. Yeah, other questions?
Kelvin, you have a couple in the chat. You want me to read them to you?
Sure, yeah. Or unless they want to speak up themselves.
Oh, yeah. William, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah.
Sure. I had two. One is just sort of a passing aside, but
yeah.
Regarding Jesus's intellectual dimension, is it fair to say that some of the more intellectually accomplished personalities in what we consider Western Enlightenment thinking were among the group of disciples? And for instance, Plato and others who went on to influence the direction of Enlightenment thinking in Western Europe in the Renaissance era. And then just a passing barb on Paul, just reminding folks that he presided over the brutal murder of who became the first martyr of Christendom.
Stephen, who's known as Saint Stephen, who was a young guy then. Yep. Yeah. And you're right. And Jesus presided over that person's stoning. Not Jesus, Paul. Paul presided over that at the stoning of Saint Stephen, because of Paul and others' persecution of Jesus's teachers.
Yes.
Stephen was one of them, obviously, known as Saint Stephen now, but Stephen then, and that person who I know who that person is today, has told me that he remembers seeing Paul sitting on a stool, leaning against a stucco wall, watching him, Stephen, get killed. So, not a pleasant memory, but something that I know that sticks in that friend of mine now's consciousness, his memory, very, very deeply. But yeah, to answer your question, Widge, there are a lot of people, Plato, who was Plato, and so forth, and who was Joseph, the many-colored robes. You know that story from the Old Testament and so forth. That was also the person who later was Plato and Pythagoras and so forth, and later the American humorist, known as a humorist, Mark Twain. And if you look at some of their writings, Pythagoras, Mark Twain, and others, I just got a text message from Mark Twain's current personage just a second ago. As I mentioned his name, naturally a text message just pops up on my screen from him. But so that's George Hammond. He came out publicly in the 30th November talk, as you guys may know. But if you look at his personality when he finally gets his book out, whenever that is, in a year or two or so when he gets his book out about his personalities, Sharon said he does that a lot. Yeah, he pops in a lot like that. You'll see a similarity of personalities that has persisted for at least 4,000 or 5,000 years that I am aware of. George's memories, I don't want to speak for him, but his memories go back longer than 4,000 or 5,000 years, but my memory of George goes back about 4,000 years when I first met him when I was an Egyptian priest, one of my several lifetimes as an Egyptian priest in ancient Egypt, when he was known as Yosef, son of my biblical scholar next to me here, Rachel. Is that right? He was son of Rachel. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of intellect there. This kind of debunks what you hear a lot about some of the dozen of disciples who are known. By the way, I want to debunk another. There are a lot more, not disciples, but apostles. There are a lot more apostles than the 12 apostles. There's George, who was my brother Andrew then. We estimate, 30 to 50 apostles out teaching, something like that. But, somebody along the way, 12 of us, and there was a core group. But we never thought of ourselves as, the unique 12 and, in some special inside group or something like that. We were all teaching, trying to help humanity. And the other point of that to debunk is that a lot of people, a lot of narratives you'll see out there saying, oh, they're just a bunch of dumb fishermen, or they just, whatever. And look what Jesus did to help enlighten them. And all of a sudden they became these amazing teachers, and, they could hardly speak and so forth. And then the next thing you know, they're giving lectures to 100 people or 200 people or 50 people. And these are dumb fishermen who all they knew was, utter a few guttural sounds or whatever. That's the impression that they give. And it's not true. I mean, some of these apostles, and I'm not just talking about the 12 apostles, I'm talking about, larger group too, of apostles who were out teaching, were very highly educated people in other lifetimes before they became apostles with Jesus. And so this goes to one of the things that I talk about our personalities persisting. You don't all of a sudden become a dumb person after you've been educating yourself and meditating a lot in other lifetimes and turning within. You may have not have called it meditation. You may have called it prayer, but you've turned within and connected with yourself. It doesn't matter what you call it, but you've connected with yourself in deep ways throughout periods of one's existence, we'll say. Then that persists with you. And it's the same thing with the apostles. You look at the history of some of these apostles, of the 12 or 30 or 40 or 50 apostles. You look back at their histories, and once they come out and they start talking about themselves, it'll be interesting to connect the dots and see, oh, that person was this person. Oh, that person was that person. Oh, this person was a princess or a prince or a leader of people or a spiritual leader in another life before they were an apostle with Jesus or whatever. Those types of things will start to, in a sense, to me, democratize, in other words, level the playing field the way people think of these historical figures, because they think of them as having had this one lifetime when they were, and I talk about all the lifetimes that I remember in my new book, a couple of dozen, and I'm not a known person in most of them. I'm a known person in 4 or 5 of them, but 20 of them are I'm just some Joe Schmo, or in one case I'm a woman Schmo. I don't know what her name was, you know what I mean? But I was a female, and I was just somebody, just like most people are most of their existence. But the takeaway is, can we learn and can we therefore, without even consciously needing to transfer, by definition, our mind continues, and therefore that knowledge transfers from lifetime to lifetime if we choose to come back. The answer is yes. So thanks for pointing that out, Widge. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Other questions? You have some other stuff there, Tamara? Yeah. Oh, Alicia, yeah, Alicia, yeah. Go ahead. I see your hand raising, yeah. Unmute yourself. You see where to unmute? Where are you? There you go.
Okay, so my my question's kind of weird, but I've had a question like this my whole life.
Yeah.
I noticed that everybody has a twin, and they're identical or not. Sometimes we have a personality twin, and I've seen it over and over and over again. Like, is there any explanation to that?
Yeah, I've heard this concept about soul twins. Is that what you're talking about?
I don't know, but
Yeah. So yeah, there's this theory about soul twins that I don't think it makes any sense to be in a literal sense, but it does in the way you're describing it, which is we can have somebody who's very twin-like with us, who seems very much alike to us, and in a lot of different ways. It could be physical. Just interestingly enough, Alicia, I don't know you noticed it, but Carlos and Anton, who are on the call right now, they are twins. They are identical twins. But if you asked each of them, and I know because, and if you asked their dad, Archie, I'm sure he would agree, but I have known them only for the last, what has it been, a week or 10 days or something like that, not that many, maybe a week I've known them since I taught them to meditate. And I can tell, I'm just meeting them for the first time, this lifetime anyway, and I can tell them apart, that they're not just the look, but their personalities are slightly different, right? And so you could have a twin that you think is wow, but the souls are individual and what I call sovereign, meaning what? So it's like the idea of sovereign. If you think of the word, if you ever heard the word sovereign country or a sovereign nation, the idea is that it's independent, it's unique and individual unto itself. So it has its own laws, it may have its own culture, might have its own language, or who knows what, its own politics, political structure, and so forth. So to me, our minds are sovereign entities. They are unique, no matter how similar I may appear personality-wise or physically wise in terms of the Carlos Anton identical twin physical issue. There's a uniqueness to the mind or consciousness or soul that each soul has, no matter how close they may seem, they may appear. And what you tend to find, Alicia, is that like it tends to attract like sometimes. So you'll have souls who resonate with each other so closely, and they tend to get attracted to each other, sometimes over multiple lifetimes, not just one lifetime, but sometimes multiple lifetimes. They'll kind of, energetically, we'll say, find each other, and they'll be together again. They might be brother and sister, they might be brother and brother, sister and sister, they might be father and daughter, they might, who knows? The relationship in terms of how we define things culturally and biologically and genealogically may be different in lifetime to lifetime, but the connection is what you're talking about. And that connection, which is undeniable to the two souls that you're talking about, may seem so close that they may seem like they're twins to others and even themselves. But to themselves, if they're really being honest, the sovereign mind, that an individual mind, can still distinguish him or her or itself from another mind, regardless of how close the resonance may be. They're not the twinness that you hear people talk about, I would say, is a figure of speech. But those people who argue that it's exactly literal, I'd say, no, it's not literal, because they may be able to read each other's minds and even think similar thoughts sometimes. But I can sometimes read some of your thoughts, and I don't claim to be you. So that is a symptom of resonance, definitely, of connection and resonant energy that resonates together. But that doesn't mean identical. So there's a subtle difference there, but it's significant difference. I don't know if that helps. Yeah. Yep. Good, interesting, good question. Other questions? Yes. Yeah. You want to follow up, Alicia? Go ahead. Yeah.
I did have another question about Jesus's abilities, how he was able to be empathetic. I mean, understanding, I guess, and even clairvoyant.
Yep.
And hearing people's thoughts, and how
Yep.
we're supposed to really try and be kind and nice like Jesus. Anyway, that's difficult sometimes, but I feel like we carry his characteristics that we're not really aware of it, or definitely don't talk about it, being like Jesus in his ways.
Yeah. Is that the end of your question? Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great point. It's not easy to love in the way that he defined love. So he's come to me recently, as some of you know, in the last several years, and he's explicitly asked me to talk more about the nuances of love, because a lot of people know the general, okay, accepting other people, and most people think of love in this romantic way, and you have the flutter of your heart and all that kind of stuff. And it's real. I'm not saying it's not real, it's real, but it's incomplete. It's very, very incomplete. Because what happens when that feeling goes away? Are you not a loving person anymore? Don't you love that person who you quote unquote, fell in love with? Those are all terms, okay, that we use. And very often people equate those terms with love in a more comprehensive way. And I say, no. It's not inaccurate, but it's very incomplete. And so the way he defined love was accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. And that's what you're talking about, his ability to be clairvoyant and see their minds, see them for who they were. He could see who you were just by being with you. And so he wouldn't have to ask you questions. He didn't have to have lunch with you. Or, you know what I mean? It was just, you're right. He just knew it. It's a knowingness. So I talk about this idea of knowingness in my new book. I talk about that idea. And that's kind of like, you could call it clairvoyant, but it's a knowingness that he just knew everything that was needed to be known about that person. And he accepted it. And so people felt that as love, because that is what love is, in my opinion. I think his definition is a beautiful definition. Accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. Not the ideal image even of who you wish they would be. That's the thing. No. It's whoever they are. Now, the rubber meets the road, you said, because it's sometimes difficult, you said, because, we talk, being kind is maybe sometimes difficult with somebody who's not being kind reciprocally. In return, they're not being kind. They may be a cruel person even. They may actually enjoy hurting you or others. And those people, how do you love that person? So what he would say, so here's where the nuance comes in, right? Nuances is where life is lived. Life is lived in the gray areas of life, in my opinion, right? And so understanding this nuances that I'm going to talk about, this is really where it happens, then you can really be a loving person. So what he would say with the cruel person who enjoys hurting other people, he would say, loving them is, what did I say? What did he say? How did he say it? He said, accepting them for who they are, not who you wish they were. So you don't try to change that person into something other than who they are. That's how he's defining love. You're not trying to force them into a size 9 shoe when they have a size 12 foot, It is what it is, or vice versa. They have a size 6 foot and you're trying to, make them walk around in a size 12 shoe. No, they are who they are. Don't try to change them. Accept who they are. Now, what does he mean by acceptance here? So here's the judgment issue comes in. So here's another subtle nuance in terms of learning how he taught about love. It's not that you accept and don't judge the person's behavior. You do judge their behavior, but you don't judge the person's soul, is what he would say. So we're not judging their soul as being, oh, they're this kind of person. You might judge them, their soul, based on their behavior, but it's not just based on something that you made up in your mind or some feeling that you have. You're judging it based on some, what I would call in 21st century language, hard evidence. You got evidence that the person is a cruel person because they emotionally berated you, they gaslighted you, if you guys know what that means, saying that you made something up and they actually made it up and they make it sound like you did. That's gaslighting. And or they're actually physically hurtful to you, then clearly you got evidence that that person, that you can judge that person as a cruel person. As opposed to what? As opposed to just meeting somebody and deciding, they're a bad person because you just don't like the way they look or something. That's that kind of superficial judgment. He would say, no, we don't judge a person's soul or their inside by their outside superficially, but yes, on their behavior, we judge them. Yep, we judge them. And that's how that, but he said, we're not judging their soul even by their behavior. He's saying, see their bad behavior and then do something about it. Act, which may mean leave the relationship or the bar that you're in, or the sidewalk that you're walking on and somebody's walking down the street wielding a knife, acting crazy. You go to the other side of the street, you take a turn down, whatever. So you act, but that person is who they are. Now, acting may also mean calling 911. So it's not just acting passively either. It may be proactively acting responsibly and calling 911 and calling the cops too. So he's not saying to be passive, which is a lot of times, you'll hear people talk about Jesus's, way of loving, and they make it sound like, the turn the other cheek thing, like somebody hits you and then you turn the other cheek and let them hit the other cheek. He never said that. Somebody made that up. I don't know who put that, threw that in the story narrative, but he never said that. That's the opposite of what he said and I think it's in Matthew, and Cayman can probably tell us what chapter and verse, but whatever it is, it's, wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove, that notion. Wise as a serpent means don't be stupid. I mean, that Kelvin Chin, direct 21st century language, wise as a serpent means don't be an idiot, and gentle as a dove, yeah, be gentle, but don't be stupid. Don't be hurtful, be kind, but don't be stupid either, okay? So a lot of people have very much fallen into, and I don't mean just from 2,000 years ago, I mean from over the past 2,000 years even, have had other lifetimes, maybe as a nun, maybe as a priest, maybe as a minister, or maybe just as somebody who's very devout, who wasn't a spiritual leader, but somebody who, not a member of clergy, but who went to church for regularly and heard the clergy keep saying over and over again, turn the other cheek, and just be like a dove and be like a sheep and so forth. And that has been kind of almost hammered into the consciousness of the person who's now living in 2023 planet Earth, who gets abused and forgets to stand up for him or herself because they've forgotten the beginning of Jesus's teaching. Wise as a serpent, right? So anyway, I hope, does that help? Does that help?
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, good. Stokes, you raise your hand, I think.
Yeah. Okay, sort of along this line, and this is a little controversial. If you don't want to answer it, that's fine. But I live in Fairfield. I'm in the TM, been involved with the TM movement. Lately, it's coming out, a lot of people are having to deal with this. It's come out that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was having serial sexual relations with multiple female students.
Mm.
And at the same time, I was telling people to be celibate, and a lot of people feel betrayed and are trying to process that.
Yeah,
So, do you have any comments on that?
sure. Yeah, I have lots of comments on that. Do you have a specific question, or you just want me to make some comments?
Why don't you start making some comments? I'll see if I have any questions about
Sure.
it. So,
Yeah, so some people have heard about that. And and many of you know that I studied with, if you don't know, that I studied with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in the 1970s, and I was an international leader in his organization at the time. At the time, I knew nothing about anything that what Stokes is, or Quentin, his nickname is Stokes.
Stokes, yeah.
Yeah, is talking about. I didn't know anything about it until recently. I heard about it when I was organizing the 30th November talk. Actually, somebody brought it up to me, who I didn't know, who brought it up, and connected me with one of the women, actually, Judith Bork, because
Yeah, Judith, yeah.
in Europe, and that was 2014. So that's when I heard about it, but I didn't know about it in the 70s. But it doesn't surprise me in a sense in the following way. It's disappointing, very disappointing, because he lied to a lot of people saying that he was celibate and so forth and so on. I think celibacy, generally speaking, and again, it's just a generalization, as a spiritual requirement, because it is a spiritual requirement in some of these traditions, in some of these monastic traditions. It's a spiritual requirement. It's an absolute. It's not, when I say requirement, that's why I thought for a second, what should I call it? It's a requirement. It's an absolute rule. I think it's foolish. I think it's foolish. It can be a choice somebody makes. You know, I've had years where I was celibate, you know, in this lifetime. I've had, and those of you who've read my book, you know that I've had lifetimes where I was celibate and so forth. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that making it a rule to be spiritual is foolish, because you don't have to be celibate to be a spiritual person. So, so in that, again, I'm not saying that to defend Maharishi. I'm saying that just in general, because he made choices, not just with that, but he made other choices that I don't agree with also, that were business choices that he knows, because I still communicate with him on the other side. And he was John the Baptist in a previous lifetime. He was the prophet Elijah before that. And he's had other spiritual roles in human history. So I don't discount his ability to be a spiritually revolutionary type teacher. That's, is he flawed? Was he flawed? Is he still flawed? Sure. I think we all are. I think everybody is. Jesus is. Everybody's flawed. People may not like to hear me say that Jesus was flawed, but I can give you examples of it from my memory 2,000 years ago. But are these beings, Jesus, John the Baptist, Maharishi, whoever you want to talk about, are they incredibly self-aware, powerful, well-meaning, and talented and great spiritual teachers? Yes, they absolutely are. So they're not mutually exclusive. So the people who I find, and I have friends, Stokes, from back in the 1970s, who've divorced themselves emotionally, psychically, professionally, everything from Maharishi when they found this out about him. And I think that I understand it. I don't criticize them for divorcing themselves from him. I understand it, but I think it's largely borne out because of their view of him as infallible. And that is, and to me, that's a fallibility on their part. What do I mean by that? Once you've been around the planet, and if you've paid attention long enough, you know that nobody is perfect. Doesn't matter which guru, doesn't matter which spiritual teacher, that nobody is perfect. There's no such thing as perfection. Everybody's growing on some level to some degree. Now, are some spiritual teachers that we've named seem, very more self-aware than other people. Yes. Okay. I'm not saying everybody's the same, but nobody's perfect. And I don't know if you know my friend Phil Goldberg, but Phil, wrote a book, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's something like American Veda, I think, or maybe that might be the book. Anyway, American, you can check it out. But Phil I know Phil from back in the day, and we were on the 6-month course together, if you know what that was, in the same hotel, 75 of us. And I know Phil from back in the 70s. And Phil wrote a book, and he researched I don't know all, but most of the known Indian gurus who came over. I don't know when he started. It was in the if he started in the 50s or 60s, but in the 60s and 70s for sure, and maybe even later, the Indian gurus who came over. And so those Indian gurus, all of them have engaged in sexual, we'll call it misconduct, because they're violating their celibate vows. And that includes the women too. I'm not going to name names, but there are some very, very well-known, let's just say, well-known women, female gurus who are currently have many millions of followers, who travel around the United States and the world. And I have not firsthand, but I got secondhand accounts of them having multiple affairs with their assistants and others and so forth. So that's why I think I don't judge the person's spirituality based on that. That's why I think it's a bad rule. It's a bad requirement, the celibacy. Now, pedophilia, no. Okay. Yeah. But, and then there was, I think it's pretty well known that Babaji was a male pedophile. So, young boys. Yeah. So,
yeah. But the thing about it is that he was the master, he was the spiritual master. So it's sort of a difference of power, authority and power between Maharishi and some of these
in that tradition, that tradition, which the word ESCHEW, I eschew, I reject. I've never been a proponent of that, even when I was studying with Maharishi. I've always viewed him as a teacher. I've never viewed him as a perfect being. And I respected him for his teaching, but I never viewed any of these guys. You guys, some of you have read my book, my history, and I've been up with some very great spiritual leaders, and I've seen their mistakes. And even with Maharishi, when I was with him personally in the 70s, I'd see him make mistakes. There were clear mistakes. They weren't the kind of mistakes that people could say, "Oh, well, you just don't understand because you're not as evolved as he is. So you think it's a mistake and it's not a mistake." No, there were mistakes.
Yeah, but it can't be consensual. Somebody was commenting in the chat about if it's consensual, it's okay. It's not consensual when there's that much of a power differential.
Power difference, yeah. When the power difference is, you can't say it's consensual when it's that the power difference is that great. That's the issue. That's the issue. Because if you understand the Vedic and the Buddhist traditions and other traditions as well, look at Muslim imams. The Muslim imams have done some horrific stuff, and I'm not going to share stories because I have very, very close personal friends who were violated by Muslim imams who swore to secrecy and then violated that secrecy immediately within seconds, to the great physical and emotional detriment and abuse of the person to whom from whom the Muslim imam was entrusted this secret information. It happens in all the traditions. So I'm not picking on Muslims. I'm saying every tradition, the Christians, look at the priests, the Catholic priests, every tradition, we're talking about Vedic tradition, the Buddhist, and so forth. It's horrific. And it's not to be countenanced, in my opinion. And so, but the notion that they are perfect and that they somehow stand above everybody and that they're somehow closer to what some people refer to as God or some other being or supreme being or whatever they call it, you know, if you believe in that stuff, it doesn't, it's completely anathema. And so I teach that each individual needs to make decisions for themselves and not be blindly following them, because the master-disciple relationship is a relationship by definition of blind following. You do not question the master. You don't question the master. So if the master is literally patting on his bed to sit down next to you, and you go do that because the master, you don't question the master.
Right.
That's so it's, you could say the women were infatuated with Maharishi, and that's, some people could say that, and I would say that both things can be true. They were infatuated with him and he abused his power at the same time. Okay.
He did. The other thing is that he taught, you know, the cosmic consciousness, you have spontaneous right action, and that was an error.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a major error. There is no such thing. Now, can you attune yourself and align yourself and connect with yourself more within yourself and have actions that's more, we could say, spontaneously right more of the time? Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
But the absoluteness of that in the all the time, every time, that's what we need to throw water on, because that's incorrect. It's, you can still make mistakes, but can you make fewer mistakes? Yes. And that's why I teach what I teach. And that's what I teach, both the two prongs of the approach of my teaching that you guys know. I teach meditation, that's turning within. You connect with yourself, your larger sense of self. You make your mind more powerful and clear. And the second point is what? Which I talk about more in my purple book, right? Is all these ideas. And how do we wrap our mind around ideas and think about them more clearly? Those two approaches together help create, on my experience over the last 6,000 years, me using this approach, that's helped me live a more contented, peaceful, inwardly peaceful life, and a life externally where I'm making fewer mistakes. Have I made mistakes along the six? Absolutely, I've made mistakes. Have I tried to learn from them over the 6,000 years that I remember? Yeah, and that's what I encourage us all to do. So can we move more towards spontaneous right action? Certainly. But the absoluteness, the thinking, as you said, as you correctly said, it's not absolute across the board, everything you do. That's that notion of perfection, and it doesn't exist. It's a myth. It's a nice kind of carrot to put in front of people to kind of lure them to move in a certain spiritual direction. But here's the big difference, and I just started talking about this next point, and then we'll go to the next question. I just started talking about this next point in my recent interviews, and that's, I've talked about people, somebody in my recent interviews, this literally like a couple days ago, they're not even out yet, so you can't hear it. You'll see it on the, you know, I'll post it, you know, when they come out. I did three interviews in the last 4 days. And so none of them are out yet, but you'll hear me talk about this notion when they ask me, what have I learned over the 6,000 years? And I thought about this. And so I'm saying something different. What I'm saying is that what I've learned is that we've been going about this notion of spiritual development all wrong. It's been an incorrect approach to spiritually develop humanity for thousands of years. That the idea that you need to conform to a set of rules, that's religion X, Y, or Z, or spiritual group ABC set up, or whoever, you know, master this sets up, guru this sets up, and you got to follow, whatever. That notion that you've got to conform to this set of thinking or rules is incorrect. That instead, because it violates, why is it incorrect? Because it violates free will. It violates the individual's inherent, I would argue, eternally and inherent automatic existence of free will. To make free will means what? Personal choice, to make their own choices. and that we need to allow people to make their own choices. But the but is, people would say, well, then chaos would happen. Okay, I'm not saying not to have social rules and to do away with laws. No, I think socially we still need to have those. I'm talking about spiritually, and that we need to allow people to skin their knees, make their mistakes, and instead I'm teaching concepts. That's what I do now. I teach ideas and concepts and how to align our desires better with our thoughts and our behavior and our actions, so that we become, what's that? When we have fulfillment of desires, what's that? That's called happiness, isn't it? Contentment, inner peace. So teaching concepts that move people more in that state of alignment that way, instead of a misalignment, which is a little where most people are at, trying to figure out what the heck, and then stepping on people and bullying people in the process. So again, instead of saying thou shalt, I think, again, this is my opinion, that I think we've gone about it in a way that's actually self-limited ourselves. All right. So before we get to you, Tamara, there's some questions in the
I have to leave.
something. Yeah, you want to read what's in the, go ahead and read what's here, but in case they don't want to, because cats.
Okay, I'll read it and then I need to hop off.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm not familiar. Okay, if consensual, what is the problem? Got it. Okay, we're in human form. Can I make a point about making mistakes? Was that covered, William?
Not yet, but
Go-
if Kelvin has time,
go-
I'll be
go
happy to.
Go up to Kat's first, because she said she can't speak. Widge can speak his in a sec. Go ahead.
Got it. Okay, so I can't share on video at the moment. Once you said you can attend classes on the other side, what do you mean and what for?
Oh, yeah, you can attend classes on the other side. You can do when you're on the other side, basically you can do whatever you want to do. So you can attend classes or not attend classes. You can just go to the beach and go to the beach. Basically, you can just think I'm going to beach up, and you're at the beach. Or you can attend classes. So I think what Kat's referring to is, I've mentioned that, you meant you, Kelvin, attending classes. Yeah, I attend classes. I've attended classes on the other side, because that's how I am. I'm like a sponge, like, oh, give me your ideas about this, and even if I don't agree with them, I still like to hear people's ideas. So there's that, but I also see people, if you got to go, Tamara, thanks. Yeah, go ahead. Good to see you. If you're also talking about, sometimes I've said to you guys, I've said to some of you guys that I see a little window into the other side sometimes when I'm teaching these classes, and I can see beings on the other side who are sitting in on my classes, whether it's this class or my meditation class, sometimes my group classes and so forth. I've had glimpses into. So, there's lots of people who can choose to go to classes on the other side too, if you want to, about all kinds of things, Yeah. So, Widge, did you want to ask? And then,
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I'll be quick. It's back to this question about the notion of making mistakes a spontaneous right action once you've been turning within for a long time. And I want to kind of plug your and George's and the 30th November's emphasis on free will. And the question is, isn't it possible after you've been turning within for a while to get a real strong feeling that, choice A is a mistake, and still with your free will deciding, I think I'll go for the mistake. I mean that you have free will. You can know what's right and wrong and still choose, and likely will from time to time choose what you know to be a mistake.
Maybe it's not a mistake. Maybe it's just a choice that's close to another choice. That's the way I would look at it. Because who's to say that what's a mistake is a mistake? Because there's so many. I mean, mistake is usually is a term we can use in retrospect, because that's when you're going to know it's a mistake, because there's nothing that is preordained absolutely. So that's the notion of free will anyway, right?
Yeah. I was thinking more back toward our friend in Fairfield's comment about some of Marishi's choices and actions, that he may well have known what he was doing
Yeah,
was going to have
exactly.
not so
And
positive
yeah,
consequences, but
and he chose it anyway. Yeah,
chose
and
it anyway.
anyway,
Yeah.
and he said, "Okay, I'm gonna bear the consequences."
Yeah.
And they do. That's it. No, absolutely. Free will means free will. Free will means that means you choose any make anything. It doesn't matter. And so what I personally have noticed, as you say, and this is my meditation. I have to give my if you call it meditation or just turning within and connecting with myself, whatever you want to call it. The fact that I've been turning within for so long, this lifetime, 52 years, every day, I've definitely noticed that my ability to discern, what does discern mean? To distinguish choices that we're talking about is absolutely better than it was when I was 19 years old, And so, and it's not just from life experience. It's kind of, it's hard to say, how much of it's just because I'm 72 years old now. And, you garner more life experience, of course. But I've noticed it even when I was in my 20s, that my ability to discern and make choices that were more in alignment with where my thoughts, behavior, and actions actually created a fulfillment of the original desire was happening more frequently, definitely, as I got more connected within myself. So it's a real thing that you're talking about. It's not absolute, as we said, but it's a real thing to get our desires and our thoughts and emotions all lined up better so that we have more happiness and inner contentment in our lives. That's a real thing. And it's the thing that I promote in my teaching and everything. I try to language to try to help people move along in that direction, and how each of you choose to exercise your choices along that path is unique to each of you, So that's why I'm choosing now at this point in this lifetime, and probably going forward, to talk more about concepts as opposed to some of my other lifetimes where I was actually leading large groups of people, millions and tens of millions of people from a political or a military or military standpoint, helping them improve their lives that way. It's just fraught with so many complications, as those of you who have ever dabbled in any of that know, in which from this lifetime how fraught it is with complications. And so I've chosen a different route and a more free will, cognizant, and a route that's more reflective and acknowledging each individual. And I'm talking about not just you guys, but 8 billion of us on planet Earth's free will choices. Right?
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for raising that. Other questions? Yes, Anton. Yes.
When I'm talking about communicating with people on the other side, when they get reincarnated, can you still communicate with them?
Interesting question. So communicating with people on the outside, if they get reincarnated into another physical body, can you still communicate with them? The short answer is yes. And have I done that? Sure. I'll give you some examples, but is it more difficult? Yeah, maybe. but it's still possible. Why? Because what's communicating? We're communicating. It's our consciousness, it's our soul, our spirit, our mind, our awareness, whatever you want to call it. That's what's communicating. So it really doesn't matter if the person's on the other side or on this side, right? Now, might it be a little more difficult in the following sense? Because if they get reincarnated, a friend or loved one gets reincarnated, are they going to be a little bit focused on their current incarnation and what they're doing? Yeah. So could they be a little bit more distracted in a sense than if they were on the other side, not having to deal with a job and a physical body, and whether it's healthy or getting sick and, all that stuff. We don't have all that on the other side. Don't have to worry about money, that eats up a lot of mental and physical energy, but a lot of mental, we'll just talk about the mental part. A lot of our mental psychic energy gets eaten up on this side. We all know that. I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys all know that. Well, you don't have that on the other side. Are they still busy sometimes doing other things absolutely, yes. But they don't have to worry about the physical biological body. They don't have to eat, and they don't have to worry about a job and all that. So there's less distraction than if somebody had reincarnated and come in again. But you can still communicate with them. That's how I found several of you. Several of you and I, we have reconnected, and some of you know who you are. We've reconnected this lifetime. I think it's a lot of what I'm doing, and whether it's the strength of my antenna, figuratively speaking, my Martian antenna, whatever, what was that show in the 1960s? My Favorite Martian, he had he would have antenna come out of his head in the TV show. Jody's shaking his head, laughing. But anyway, it's like, but that connection, it's energetic, right? And so we connect with those who we have resonated with before. And so, Anton, no, it does not matter if they're reincarnated or not. It's possible, sure. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. There are 4 people. Oh.
Yeah. Can I just add something to Anton's thing and say that there are oftentimes people you will reconnect with when they reincarnate. You will reconnect with them physically in this life. Therefore, my comment, there are 4 people on this call, but I know for certain I've known in other lives, some extremely well. But there are also people that I deal with every day. One of my very closest friends was a dear friend over many, many lifetimes, including, and you know the story, he's my father who is my grandfather in this lifetime, died when I was a little tiny boy, and is one of my very closest friends, lives just down the road from Sharon today. She doesn't know that. But we're closest friends today, and he has no belief in reincarnation, but we're still just as close as we could possibly be, and talk probably 10 times a day, and have for 20 years. We've had many, many lives together, and he has no memory of it, but back to the twin thing, the physical similarity of this guy today in New Jersey versus what he looked like physically in Montana and Minnesota and Washington State 70 years ago is just shocking. It's like I call it reinclonation, because there's so much resonance, when you're being born and activating genes through epigenealogy and deactivating others, you end up looking really similar sometimes. Anyway, that's it. So the point is that, yeah, you may end up communicating with them more than you can imagine, even because they have reincarnated.
Yeah. Rich, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Yeah. I noticed a question, Jody, about free will. And it's not a biblical term. Free will is just a general term. Now, it may have been used in the Bible and so on and so on, but that's just happens to be free. The notion of free will has been around since long before the Bible was ever, it's ancient. It's ancient. It's many thousands of years old. It's just personal choice. I like to keep it simple, right? Pamela, I'm going to mute you unless you have a question. Okay. So there was a quick, Kelly, you had a question, I think, in the chat. Can you ask the question? You said a number of things. I saw one question that was not answered.
No, that wasn't a question. It was a comment on the Maharishi and what he had done in the past.
Or wasn't a 30th? You said something about 30th November. I thought something. No,
I don't remember because I've been disconnected so many times.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Let me remind you what it says, because you
The
said
most recent one.
Yeah, it says the power dynamic, like in states where if you are in position. No, it wasn't that one.
That's a comment.
Yeah, that's a comment. Yeah.
Does it start with when you're approached by people who ask you what you believe or like how you
Yes.
do what you do?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
what
That
would
one.
you
Yeah.
recommend to tell people? Not that I'm some great teacher, I'm so new to this, but I'm approached a lot by people who want to learn more about either psychic development, spirituality. Usually it starts with, hey, this thing happened to me. Can I talk to you about it? And then when I teach, I tell them, get this book, Overcoming the Fear of Death, go find this guy, learn about his meditation technique. And then some people I do tell them about the 30th November because they're just hung up on the whole, they're not happy with their either with Christianity or they're not Christian and they're not happy with,
Yeah.
anyway, that's it. My question.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good and safe. But are you asking, can you say more than that? And what would you say?
Where do you start? Where would you begin if you're not you and you're us and people are coming up to you all the time? I want to learn meditation. I want to learn about spirituality. I want to learn about my psychic skills. And
Yeah.
I don't know why people come up and ask me this stuff. I'm trying to figure that out.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would do what you just said. I would find somebody who I think is credible and so forth and refer them to them. If to the extent that I could help them myself, I would say something. But, I generally ask them, I'd say, what are you looking for? Are you looking for, an organization, are you looking for a big kind of organization? Because that's not Kelvin Chin. Or you know what I mean? And usually those people aren't, but that filters them out if they are. I don't know, maybe somebody else can answer the question. It's difficult for me to answer, but because it's me. But
Thanks for
back
trying though.
yeah, back in the day, I would try to answer the person as best I could, and I would try to refer them. That's what I used to do. You know, I think that's good because and the one things that you've selected are good. Out of what I would say, I would send them to my audio clip page on my meditation website. I would send them there because the audio clip page, you guys remember when I taught you, some of you I taught to meditate, there's 4 audio clips there I have you all listen to, and it takes 11 minutes to listen to all of them because each one is 2 or 3 minutes long. So most people's attention span, they can listen to something for 2 or 3 minutes. And there's 4 of them. So it's about 11 minutes. I timed it. I think it's 10 minutes and 40 seconds or something like that to listen to all of them. That's an easy start. And then that'll get them interested, and then they'll look elsewhere and so forth and so on. And yeah, the Overcoming the Fear of Death book is an easy one to get them their feet wet because it covers a lot of stuff in a way that's very non-religious, and especially people who've had their toes or feet or legs or bodies stepped on by some organized religions. They're very sensitive to that. So it's clearly not religious, as is my purple book. Not all of my work in my books are non-religious, but some people for my 3rd book, they may need a little bit more acclimation to me first before they start hearing me talk about Jesus, because they hear me talk about Jesus, they're going to think I'm sort of some Jesus freak or some, whatever, some Bible scholar or, biblical person or something who reads the Bible. And that's not me, as you know. So Jesus does not appear to me to be a religious figure. I don't talk about Jesus. I don't think about Jesus. That's not the relationship I have with Jesus as being a religious figure. He was one of my great teachers, So yeah, I think that's good. I don't know if that helps a little bit. Connie,
Thank
yes.
you a lot.
You're welcome. Connie, you got to unmute, Connie. Unmute. You got to hit *6 on your phone.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Yeah, but I had 2 different experiences where I've seen a picture of someone who looks exactly like me. This was like maybe 30 years ago. I thought that my roommate gave me a picture and said, "Now this person looks like you. I know it's not you." And I looked at it and she had the same teeth and everything. And I was like, it is not me, because I don't remember the place. But I seen another, somebody else sent me a picture of somebody who looks like me. and they weren't wearing the clothes that I would wear, so that's how I knew. But it does happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, these people looked exactly like me. I was just like,
Yeah.
oh, there's my twin.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Maybe
Hmm.
there are actually a finite number of bodies out there. I'm just joking. I don't know.
I don't know. But this is before, you know.
Yeah. Anything else, Connie? Anything else?
No.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, there's a question here from Sharon. I'll just read it. She said, have you ever had to help those who came to you with religious abuse? And the short answer is yes, unfortunately. I've helped a number of people who've come to me who've been gone through religious abuse of various kinds, as in their childhood, and young adults and so forth. And it's very traumatic. It can be very traumatic because the fears that are used to promote some religions out there, you know, I don't want to pick on any, but you guys have probably heard or read or know of some, or maybe you've unfortunately had experience with, can be very fear producing. And of course, that's the opposite of spirituality, is to create more fear in another individual. And yet there are a number of organized religious institutions, and there are unfortunately many teachers of those out of those different spiritual religious institutions that actively promote fear in people. And I've had to help, unfortunately, some folks who've had horrific childhoods and young adults who've been suicidal as a result of those I would call them very harsh and severe religious doctrines that they were taught as a young, impressionable child. It can be very, very, very difficult for folks. So yeah, I've helped a number of folks like that. Yeah. Jody, you want to say something? Oh yeah. Yeah. Did you have any questions, Jody? I know you missed the last session because you were working and so forth, but today happened to work for you, obviously. So any questions?
Yeah, I do have one question. If
Yeah.
one of us wanted to contact somebody on the other side, how would we do that?
Yeah, well, it's hit or miss, obviously, for anybody. But what I would recommend that you do, one of the things that I would recommend is, and it works for some people who I've recommended this to, it varies, of course, it's no guarantees. But when you go to bed at night, you go to sleep and you're lying in bed, it's dark, you've already brushed your teeth and you're lying there in a relaxed state, and just put out there by thinking in your mind. I mean, you could say it out loud if you wanted to, but you didn't have to, but sometimes people feel more comfortable saying it out loud, whatever. I think it has more effect, but it's just a mental energy thing anyway. So you can just think it silently in your mind that you want to be open and receptive to communicating with. And if you have an individual or group of individuals in mind, then you fill in that blank. If you don't, it's just, I want to be more open and receptive and to some communications from the other side. And then you see what happens. You go to sleep. And the reason it can increase the probability that you might open up to somebody or some beings, plural maybe, on the other side while you're sleeping is because you tend to be more open and more receptive. And in our dreaming and sleeping state, there's fewer barriers from our side. There's no guarantees, but again, it's all about increasing probabilities, right? And also, obviously, doing when I say obviously, doing all the obvious balancing stuff as well, eating well, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, turning within regularly, all of those things help increase the probabilities for what you're asking about. Yeah. Yeah, but that's a little technique that I've suggested to people over the decades, and it sometimes opens up the door for people. That and also past lives. People ask me, so, oh, I'm curious about my past lives, and I tell a story in my first book about that. The story, it's called, in the section in the first book, if those of you have my first book on overcoming the fear of death, it's called Josephine and Lucius. So the Josephine and Lucius story is about this friend of mine, Josephine, who wanted to open herself up to surpass lives. She had felt some sensings that she had felt were kind of rolling around there, but not clear enough to be in her conscious awareness. She just had some inner sensing that there was stuff there that she could access, and she did what I just told Jody, and she went to sleep and took a nap, and the whole story is in the first book. It opened her up. Yeah. Other things, other questions, anything else? Any other questions? Norris, how you doing? Any other questions in the chat? Anything? Anything else? Yeah, I want to talk about this free will thing a little bit, and then if it's other questions, great. If not, then we can call it a session, because we're almost an hour and a half anyway. Free will. We tend to forget about the free will choices about others. Most people are thinking, yeah, free will exists, and they think of their own free will, personal choices that they're making, and they go, yeah, I have free will, I can change my mind about this and that, and whatever. But what we tend to forget is that other people's free will choices affect us, and they affect our lives, and they affect our ability to make certain choices. Because what if somebody in Congress, who you don't even know, makes a law that what you wanted to do is now illegal to do? It's a clear example of somebody you don't even know affecting you indirectly and maybe very directly, and causing your own free will choices to change. Okay? So there's that, except you think about that, that's an obvious example, but think of more subtle examples like that are happening throughout the universe. And of course, okay, somebody who's living on another planet, or some animal on this planet, on planet Earth, who you don't even know. I mean, you're never going to have any physical, biological contact with the being, the person, whether it's an animal or another being or another planet, ever. But can they influence your choices? Absolutely. Very, very, very remotely and indirectly. But this affects this, and this affects this, and this affects that, and this affects that, and this affects that, and this affects that. And the next thing you're right, and all of a sudden they've affected somebody who's right in your orbit. From way out, all this affects. Those are going on all the time. Every soul in the universe having free will ability to make their own personal choices. That's what we forget. And so that's why prediction is very, very difficult. Is it possible? Yes. The closer the event is to us, the more likely we're going to be accurately able to predict what's happening. Why? Because there's fewer outside influences that can happen. But the more time between, if it's 5 years or 50 years, it's going to be a lot harder to predict things. So when you hear people talk about predictions, yes, it's possible, but it's probabilities is the way you need to think of it. That's the magic word you need to insert into the discussion, is that they're predicting a higher probability of something happening. And when they're right, this goes back to something that Widge said earlier about being mistaken about something. Yeah, they were right. How do you know that? You know that afterwards. You don't know it beforehand for sure until after it happened. Yep, their prediction was right. It's always in the past tense that you can say that, right? Even if they're right 90% of the time, they can never, ever be right 100% of the time. It's not possible. Eventually, some other influence is going to happen. And full circle on this free will thing. If people still are stubborn about thinking that free will exists in the universe, and they think that everything happens for a reason, and that everything is predictable, and everything is, can be figured out beforehand, and we're all just living in. I've been on some of these podcast interviews where people talk about, the podcast interviewer has interviewed a lot of people, not me, but other people who talk about that we're living in a matrix. We're just living in a computer program, and somebody else is figuring this all out already. Okay. I say, well, okay. And then who is that person? And they very often they'll say God or some galactic council or somebody, whatever. I mean, that's typically and I say, well, okay. So I would say to you, who is this notion, this God character that people talk about? Most people are referring to Jehovah, this personality that I refer to. You guys know me. I refer to it because I communicate with Jehovah as a personality. He's not some God figure to me. But most people view Jehovah as God, or Allah, Krishna, Yahweh. They use different cultures. You may use different terms on planet Earth. Okay. Well, if you really believe in this notion of predetermination, that destiny absolutely exists and everything is already figured out and everything happens for a meaning, you just don't know what it is because you can't know because you're not as smart as God is and all this stuff. Then how about the crucifixion of Jesus, which is how we kind of started this session today? Did Jehovah then decide before Jesus came down that number one, John the Baptist was going to get beheaded, and that number two, that Jesus was going to get crucified, and that was part of the soul plan that was planned out before several dozen of us came down as part of that soul plan? No. So if Jehovah, that personality, what I call personality, but that being that most people view as God, can't control everything in the universe to make his soul plan work out of helping people overcome the fear of death, where John the Baptist comes down as the precursor to plow the field for Jesus, and then they work together. This was the plan, that they work together and help teach and live to a ripe old age of whatever, 60, 70, 80, 90 years old, teaching along with many of you who are teaching with me. And he couldn't make that happen. Then how do you square that circle? How do you make it so that if God can't make that happen, his own soul plan, where is this notion of predestination, that everything happens for a reason and that God can control everything if God can't even control his own soul plan? I leave you with that thought to think about, right? Maybe it's because free will actually does exist, including for God, for those people who view Jehovah as God, and that nothing is predetermined. That seems to be the reality and reflection of the existence that I've experienced, at least for 6,000 years in my known memories. All right. Any last question, point before we leave? All right. Yeah, Anton? Sure, go ahead.
So when talking about reincarnation, do we have a choice to stay on the other side or to get reincarnated into a new body?
Yes, the answer to both of your questions is yes and yes. You have a choice to stay on the other side as long as you want, and you have a choice to come back and be reincarnated into a new body if you want. So nobody is telling you you have to come back. There's no panel of judges on the other side and some amazing level of consciousness who supposedly know everything, who's telling you got to go back. No, when you hear people talk about this in NDEs, yeah, there may be beings on the other side who think they're better than you or smarter than you and smarter than others who say, yeah, you got to go back. But it's kind of like your dead grandfather telling you stuff that you may or may not agree with. I mean, I have clients who've told me stories about their grandmother trying to fix them up with some really nice, handsome guy who got a great job. And they go, yeah, but grandma, I'm not attracted to him at all. I don't want anything to do with him. So when that grandmother dies, is you know, all of a sudden listen to her advice just because she's on the other side? No. So people will say, oh, but I was told to come back, or I was told I had to do this, and I was told that this was my mission. Yeah, you can be told a lot of things, but you decide. You decide. You decide. Do you want to take it on as your mission? That's the point that Widge was bringing up earlier. You may have a number of choices set up in front of you, but you decide. You decide, right? And then you bear the consequences of those decisions, right? You live with the consequences of those decisions, and hopefully we learn from the consequences of those decisions. That's my teaching point from having all these memories of these past lives. I don't know. Does that help? Yeah. Yeah. Anything else before we go? Any one last question before we go? Yeah. Good to see everybody. Great session. See you in a month, 30th of July, every week. I mean, every month. Now, if you've already registered for this, you don't have to register again. You can use the same link. If you keep the link, you can use the same link. And I'm going to do my best. I have reminders in my calendar to remind myself to re-up the series in August so that we won't need to change the link like we had to do in January whenever I forgot to, or February whenever I forgot to change the re-up the link. So you should be able to use this link if you've already registered. You don't have to register again. Okay, good. See you guys. Have a good month. And those of you who I will see in the meantime, I will see you in the meantime. And those of you who are a little bit under the weather, we send blessings and support and healing to all of you who are a little under the weather. So take care. We'll see you. Great to see you guys from Philippines too. To see you. Take care.
Thanks.